When it comes to South Park characters who have become absolutely beloved despite not being the center of attention all that often, you have to talk about the Goth Kids. Following their introduction in Season 7, these brooding misfits quickly turned into fan favorites, even though for nearly 10 entire years after the fact, only one of them even had a name. But between their distinct designs, their insanely quotable lines, and the way that they're used to pointedly but still very lovingly satirize goth culture, you'd be hard-pressed not to warm up to them after a while. Never mind the fact that for all their talk about death and despair, they honestly have one of the most wholesome friendships in all of South Park. So settle into your favorite booth at Village Inn, make sure you're topped off on black coffee, and prove that you're no conformist by watching this video on South Park's Goth Kids. You know, drinking all that coffee and smoking so many cigarettes at such a young age might catch up to the Goth Kids later in life. And if they want to avoid being conformists to find the specific right care for their needs, they might appreciate today's video sponsor, Zocdoc. Zocdoc is a free website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors, choose the right one for your needs, and click instantly to book an appointment. And Zocdoc isn't just for one type of care. They have more than 100,000 providers across nearly every specialty. From primary care to dental health, eye care to urgent care to mental health, they have it all. It's the one-stop shop for all your healthcare needs, plus it's completely free to use. And when you find the doctor you need, you can look at their actual appointment openings, choose a time that works for you, and instantly book a visit with a click of a button. Plus, Zocdoc helps you get appointments fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking, and you can even score same-day appointments if you need them. No need to call doctor's offices and wait on hold either. With Zocdoc, you can do everything online. Stop waiting, stop guessing, and start getting the care you need. Go to ZocDoc.com/Johnny2Cellos to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/Johnny2Cellos to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. Thanks to Zocdoc for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to the Goth Kids.
Everyone's just walking around like a bunch of conformists.
The Goth Kids, Mykal, Pete, Henrietta, and Ferkel, first appeared in the Season 7 episode Raisins, smack in the middle of what many consider to be the show's golden age. These four can usually be found sulking, chain-smoking, talking about how much life sucks, or all of the above, while hiding out behind the school or drinking their weight in coffee at Village Inn.
Not now, lady. We're really depressed.
So what else is new?
To fully understand the Goth Kids themselves, there is a bit of context regarding goth culture in general that I think's worth getting into, and you'll see why pretty soon. The goth subculture sprang from gothic rock, which itself emerged as a part of the post-punk movement in the UK during the late 1970s and early 1980s, though of course certain influences date back much further.
All genres of gothic subcultures are derivatives of Poe's work. Motherfucker.
But as its name implies, post-punk was a broad collection of musical styles inspired by the initial punk rock movement. I bring this up because punk and its derivatives have long had a habit of self-contradiction. The punk movement was founded on the virtue of non-conformity, the irony being that before too long, if you went to any given punk show, you were guaranteed to see countless people who looked and acted almost exactly the same. You also had self-appointed gatekeepers enforcing these things, and all of a sudden, a subculture that was supposed to be about embracing individuality and rejecting authority now had a dress code and a list of rules.
Everyone's just walking around like a bunch of conformists.
The punk rock community has actually been criticizing itself for this since at least the early 1980s. Songs like I'm Not a Punk by The Descendants, Bored of You by Agent Orange, and Boxcar by Jawbreaker all call out that cognitive dissonance. But perhaps the most scathing example is Chicken Shit Conformist by the Dead Kennedys, which laments the punk rock scene turning into, quote, a close-minded, self-centered social club. And if you're at all familiar with South Park's Goth Kids, you probably already know where I'm going with this.
If you want to be one of the non-conformists, all you have to do is dress just like us and listen to the same music we do.
These kids sort of epitomize the elitism that took hold in a lot of alternative subcultures. They preach nonconformity, yet are instantly dismissive of anyone who isn't exactly like them. And what tends to make the Goth Kids so funny is their complete lack of self-awareness regarding this hypocrisy. Apart from some fleeting moments, the irony of it all seems totally lost on them.
I'm not gonna be in the talent show.
This, as well as many of their central character traits, are on full display during their debut appearance in Raisins, which would kick off what is now a trilogy of goth-centric stories. Man, a lot of secondary South Park characters are more or less fully realized in their first major appearances, aren't they? When Stan falls into a deep depression after Wendy dumps him, he starts hanging out with the Goth Kids, basically choosing to associate with people who still validate and reinforce his self-pity, rather than those who would try to pull him out of it. And at first glance, the Goth Kids actually seem pretty welcoming. They bring Stan in with open arms. They even extend an invitation to Butters after he suffers his own heartbreak near the end of the episode. But we also see that gatekeeping rear its ugly head, as they're very quick to chide Stan anytime he does or says something not goth enough for their liking. They say they're helping him be a non-conformist, but they're actually just peer pressuring him into conforming to them.
Well, I don't drink coffee.
You can't be a non-conformist if you don't drink coffee.
The first appearance also questions whether or not the Goth Kids even have the right to be so mopey all the time. For example, Henrietta describes an abusive, neglectful home life, only for the episode itself to almost immediately contradict her.
Henrietta! Hi, sweetie!
Go away, Mom. Leave me alone.
But I'm going to put a pin in that one for now, since a lot of the things established about the Goth Kids' home lives in this episode would go on to be recontextualized later on, if not outright retconned. In the meantime, it's actually Butters who convinces Stan to leave the Goth Kids by pushing back on their nihilistic worldview in a way that finally gets through to him.
He's right. I don't even know who I am anymore. I like liking life a lot more than hating it. Screw you guys. I'm going home.
The Goth Kids wouldn't have a starring role again for another 5 seasons, but they did become semi-regular faces around South Park following their debut, and these minor appearances reveal some interesting details about them. For instance, something I never see anyone mention about the Goth Kids is the fact that they're implied to be pretty big gamers. Maybe it's because we never actually see them playing any video games, but they're apparently PlayStation diehards. In Season 9's Best Friends Forever, they're at the very front of the line for the PSP launch, meaning they were likely camped out all night. I mean, the only one who beat them to the store was Kenny. I guess being caffeinated up to the gills comes in handy sometimes. Much later in Season 17's Black Friday trilogy, the Goth Kids join the Black Friday war on the PS4 side, and the reason for this apparent brand loyalty is pretty, well, on brand.
Of course we're going to go with the PS4. They're blacker.
I wonder how livid the Goth Kids were when they saw what the PS5 looked like for the first time. But another detail I really liked is how Stan actually stays on relatively decent terms with the Goth Kids even after he ditches them. I wouldn't go so far as to say that they're friends, but there's definitely a begrudging respect between them. For starters, Stan is actually the one who convinced the Goths to take up arms on Black Friday. Sure, it takes some persuading, but it's hard to imagine they would have willingly agreed to get involved in the whole Game of Thrones thing had literally anyone else asked them to, especially since it involved sharing space with a certain rival group that we'll talk about in a minute. There's also Season 12's breast cancer show Ever, in which the Goth Kids try to get Stan to intervene after Wendy challenges Cartman to a fist fight.
And you're gonna just let that guy beat up on your woman? Doesn't that, go against your jockey man code or something?
Also, remember how I said the Goth Kids occasionally do show flashes of self-awareness? Well, we see the first real instance of this in Season 8's You Got F'd in the A. Stan tries to recruit the Goths to be in his dance crew, and one by one, Pete, Henrietta, and Ferkel all turn him down on the grounds that competing in a dance competition would make them conformists. And in that moment, we see the metaphorical light bulb turn on above Mykal's head, even if it ends up turning off again by the end of the episode.
I'm such a non-conformist that I'm not going to conform with the rest of you. Okay, I'll do it.
But while the Goth Kids have a soft spot for Stan, dressing in black for a little while isn't guaranteed to win you their respect. One of the more interesting things about South Park's satirization of goth culture is the fact that, generally speaking, real-life goths seem to find it pretty endearing. And as far as I can tell, there are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, while series creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone definitely make a lot of jokes at the expense of the Goth Kids, it's usually in good fun and rarely comes off as too mean-spirited.
I think we just got put in our place.
Yeah, we just got goth served.
More importantly though, for as much as they poke fun at goth culture, they also depict it very authentically. This isn't like, say, Chinpokomon, where Matt and Trey clearly didn't get the appeal of the thing they were making fun of, or even really understand it at all for that matter, but they are intimately familiar with both goth music and culture. In fact, the Goth Kids seem to be at least partially based off people Matt actually grew up with.
I don't think I was ever a goth, but a lot of my friends were. I mean, goth culture, the people that went to Denny's and drank coffee all night, I definitely know some of those.
Matt and Trey have also made no secret of the fact that they're both huge fans of The Cure, one of the bands that was at the forefront of the original gothic rock movement in England. They even got The Cure's frontman Robert Smith to voice himself all the way back in Season 1's Mecha Streisand, and they did not hold back on the glazing either.
Wow, Robert Smith is the greatest person that ever lived.
Our savior!
This familiarity is rather evident whenever Matt and Trey parody gothic rock in the show. Like, their version of it is obviously exaggerated for comedic effect, but honestly, not that much. It's pretty spot on. That theme of authenticity is at the heart of the Goth Kids' second major appearance in the Season 12 finale, The Ungroundable. This was a pretty unique note to end the season on, as none of the main 4 boys appear in this episode for more than a minute or two. Rather, this story is split up pretty evenly between the Goth Kids Kids and Butters. It also notably marks the introduction of the Vamp Kids, an ever-growing group of elementary schoolers who identify as vampires, complete with plastic fangs and blood rituals. Don't worry though, it's actually just clamato juice.
Oh, that tastes awful!
Believe it or not, there actually is a vampire subculture that does this sort of thing in real life, and it largely exists as an offshoot of goth. But it should be pretty clear by now that the goth kids we know and love are hardline purists, so they don't exactly appreciate this new clique suddenly showing up and biting their stees. To make matters worse, because they already dress in a similar fashion, everyone starts thinking that they're trying to be vampires too.
I was just telling your friends about what I expect of your.
We aren't friends.
Keep in mind, while it's true that the real-life goth-adjacent vampire subculture existed well before this episode aired, the Ungroundable depicts a very specific breed of vamp kid. As a matter of fact, its status as the season 12 finale starts to make a lot more sense when you remember that it debuted on Comedy Central literally 2 days before the first Twilight movie released in theaters, and the episode itself freely admits that it was informed by Twilight Mania, which was kicking into overdrive at the time.
You know that girl Bella in Twilight? I think I'm like her. I'm a Psy vampire. Do you like these sparkles I got?
On top of that, we learn over the course of the episode that the Vamp Kids are former preppies, and they only started dressing alternatively after the Banana Republic they used to buy all their clothes at was replaced by a Hot Topic. So while I certainly do not condone elitism or gatekeeping or anything like that, it's very easy to see why the Goth Kids view the Vamp Kids as nothing more than trend chasers, tourists, and above all, posers.
So all of a sudden you Justin and Brittany wannabes think it's cool to dress like us?
But why do they care so much? Well, near the middle of the episode, we get a very telling moment, which could serve to partially explain why the Goth Kids became Goth Kids in the first place. When they try dressing in a more conventional way to avoid being grouped in with the Vamp Kids, it's hinted that this isn't entirely uncharted territory for them.
Yeah, it's over there, by that fat girl, the big-nosed kid, the midget, and the kid with pockmarks on his face.
So we're back to that, are we?
The implication here is that the Goth Kids were outcasts long before they started dressing in black. They were mocked by their peers for superficial things about their appearance, some of which they couldn't really even control. So it seems that they saw becoming goth as a way of taking ownership over their own identity. They were going to tell everyone who they were, not the other way around. From their perspective, being goth isn't just part of who they are, it is who they are. So they're going to interpret any perceived bastardization of that culture as a personal affront.
Get out of our space, you little twerps!
But something I alluded to in the intro, and something I'll dive into a bit more in detail later on, is that the Goth Kids do have a pretty strong bond, and the subculture they chose to embrace after being rejected by the rest of their peers is the thing that's sort of attaching them at the hip. So it actually makes a lot of sense why they were so willing to invite Stan and Butters to join them back in Raisins. They saw them as yet another pair of dejected souls. And speaking of Butters, his story in the Ungroundable actually mirrors the Goth Kids in this way. For his part, Butters joins up with the Vamp Kids after he gets sick and tired of his classmates ignoring him and his parents mistreating him. He's looking for that same sense of belonging. Although, while a lot of kids become vampires in this episode, we also see that the Vamp Kids aren't above engaging in some gatekeepy behavior themselves.
You're not cool enough to be one of us. Yeah, I know.
For as much as the Goth Kids insist that they're nothing like the Vamp Kids, there are definitely some similarities between the two, beyond just the aesthetic ones. We still wouldn't actually learn Mykal's name for another 5 seasons after this, but I don't know, do you think it's intentional or just a coincidence that the leader of the Goths and the leader of the Vamps basically have the same first name?
Aren't you Mike Mykowski?
That's Vampire Mykowski now.
Butters eventually does convince the Vamp Kids to let him join, but in typical Butters fashion, he drinks the Kool-Aid, or the clamato juice, a little too hard, and ends up believing that he's actually a vampire. After he decides this life is not for him, we get a really nice full circle moment with Butters going to the Goth Kids for help after previously rejecting them in their debut. His timing couldn't have been better either. The Goth Kids were fresh out of ideas after kidnapping and shipping Mike to Arizona in a failed attempt to stop the growing vampire scourge. Butters tells them that the real solution is to destroy the vampire's lair, which brings us back to the hot topic of it all.
Of course. Freaking Hot Topic. That explains everything. How did we not figure that out?
Hot Topic as an entity is kind of a perfect enemy for the Goth Kids, and it all comes down to that alleged lack of authenticity. The retail chain has long been accused of commodifying and corporatizing alternative subcultures, especially after it dropped its edgy look in favor of something cleaner and more approachable. Its inclusion here is also super fitting, since Hot Topic was indeed a big hub for the whole Twilight Mania thing I mentioned. There's definitely a more nuanced conversation to be had about Hot Topic, particularly how it's sometimes the only place to go for people who want to get into things like goth or punk, but don't really live somewhere with an active scene. That being said, the Goth Kids don't really do nuance. They are absolutely going to see the store as just poser central, hence the drastic action they end up taking. This whole sequence is especially hilarious when you realize that Hot Topic actually sells a fair amount of Goth Kids merch these days, plus just a ton of South Park merch in general. There are layers to the irony here. But after the Ungroundable, the Goth Kids once again kind of fade into the background as they wait around for their next starring appearance, though they do occasionally get some prominence in the meantime. We see Mykal join Randy's pissed off and angry party in season 15's TMI, though easily the Goth Kids' biggest role during this period comes as part of season 14's superhero trilogy, in which we learn that they're all members of a cult that worships the eldritch being Cthulhu.
Makes sense. Unrelenting despair in 1,000 years of darkness sounds pretty goth.
Contrary to Kenny's point though, it also doesn't make sense and is yet another example of the Goth Kids' hypocrisy. Fringe as it may be, joining a cult is about as conformist as it gets, though to be fair to the Goths, they quickly turn their backs on Cthulhu after his reign of terror leaves them thoroughly unimpressed.
We worshipped and prayed to Cthulhu, went to all the cult meetings, but life is still totally freaking gay.
This trilogy also reveals that Henrietta has a brother, Bradley Biggle, aka Mintberry Crunch, although I guess he's actually her adopted brother, and he goes back to his home planet at the end. It's a whole thing. Don't worry about it. As for the rest of the Biggle family, we haven't seen the last of them just yet. South Park's trilogy of goth-centric tales reached its conclusion in the aptly titled Season 17 episode, Goth Kids 3: Dawn of the Posers, and this is by far the biggest outing to date. Whereas Raisins inserted them into a Stan-centric plot, and the Ungroundable kept Butters around as sort of a tether to the main cast, this is an out-and-out Goth Kids story from top to bottom. They even get their very own custom intro sequence. So it should come as no surprise that this is the episode that tells us the most about the Goth Kids' home lives. It's not a super thorough deep dive, mind you. I mean, we still barely know anything about Furkel, but considering that he's a 5-year-old who smokes cigarettes and carries around a switchblade, it seems safe to assume that something's not quite right there.
Dude, that little kid is hardcore goth. Hardcore goth.
But if you'll recall, I mentioned earlier that there are some background inconsistencies with the Goth Kids. So let's get into the weeds a little bit. Back in Raisins, Mykal alludes to his parents being divorced, citing this as one of the reasons for his gloomy outlook on life.
Love didn't work for my mom and dad. Why should it work for me?
However, we see that his parents are still together in Goth Kids 3, meaning they either reconciled at one point, Mykal was exaggerating all along, or most likely, this is just a retcon. And I am inclined to believe that these are both Mykal's birth parents. He and his father have the exact same distinct nose, and as for his mother, there's really no indication that this is a remarriage situation. I mean, does Mykal really strike you as the kind of kid who would call his stepmother Mom instead of just by her first name?
Can't now, Mom. I've got an emergency.
This also ties into that question of whether or not the Goth Kids' misery has been quote-unquote earned. In Raisins, Kyle pretty bluntly states that he believes the Goth Kids have no right to behave the way they do.
Oh, like you know what pain is. Go try living in a third world country, you little pussy.
I'm not gonna live in a third world country with all the conformists.
It's interesting that Kyle says this to Pete specifically, because while Mykal and Henrietta live in the same 2-story suburban houses as most of the other kids in South Park, Pete appears to be worse off than many of his peers financially, as we see in Goth Kids 3 that he lives in a trailer. Again, they don't really dive too deep into this, but you do have to wonder if his family's economic status contributed to his bleaker outlook on life. That brings us back to Henrietta, who is decidedly the Goth Kid we know the most about in terms of her home life, but that largely feels kind of incidental up until this point. It's kind of a byproduct of two things: the fact that Henrietta is related to Mintberry Crunch, and the fact that Henrietta's bedroom seems to be the Goth Kids' go-to hangout, outside of Village Inn and the loading bay behind the school.
Henrietta, your little brother wants to play with you.
Go away, Mom. I hate you.
But what we do see is that Henrietta seems to live on a different planet than the rest of her family. Her mother is bubbly and doting, yet from the way Henrietta talks about her, you'd think she's the worst person to have ever lived. You know, like the opposite of Robert Smith. On its face, this simply paints a picture of a bratty, ungrateful kid, further playing into the idea that the Goth Kids are just miserable little jerks for no good reason. And on Henrietta's end, that's the impression you get from the vast majority of her appearances. But Goth Kids 3, which also marks the first appearance of her father, seems to challenge that idea a little bit, because this is easily the episode that paints Henrietta's parents in the worst light.
Apparently, we're not the only parents who have a child that is emo.
Fed up with her behavior, Henrietta's parents decide to send her to a camp for troubled youth. These kinds of places do exist in real life, and to put it mildly, they do not have the best reputation. Many so-called troubled teens who have been sent to these camps and facilities have reported sketchy behavior at best and flat-out abuse at worst. So yeah, not a great look for Mr. and Mrs. Biggle here. Not only that, but when you look into stories about places like this, you start to notice a trend of parents who seem less concerned with their kids actually being happy and healthy, and more concerned with them being obedient and presentable by their standards. Henrietta treats her parents terribly, especially her mom, and I am not excusing that, but she clearly feels like they don't respect her as an individual. And while she definitely tends to exaggerate, there's no real evidence that her father has a drinking problem, for example, it does make you wonder if there was at least a nugget of truth to what she was saying back in Raisins.
My dad is such an asshole. Drunken bastard doesn't even know I exist.
Back to the episode itself. Mykal, Pete, and Ferkel are obviously alarmed when they learn that Henrietta's parents sent her away, though not for the reason you may think.
All right, now, you say that you witnessed your friend being abused by her parents.
Yes, they called her an emo.
This sets up the crux of Goth Kids 3, because if Henrietta wasn't emo before she went to the camp, she definitely is when she comes back. And before I get too far away from it, I just want to point out what is probably the worst moment for Henrietta's parents. After she settles back in and makes all new emo friends, there's a scene where her mom walks in on her actively self-harming, yet views this as an improvement in her behavior because she's not being as vulgar as she used to be. You know, just in case you thought I was reaching when I said her parents may have some screwed up priorities here, at the very least, their concern is extremely selective.
Does she still seem better?
Oh, much better.
But it's upon Henrietta's return that the episode turns into a full-blown Invasion of the Body Snatchers parody, with all the kids in South Park that fall under the alternative umbrella being sent to this camp and transformed into emos by evil plants. Recognizing this as a problem that's bigger than all of them, the Goth Kids decide to join forces with the Vamp Kids to put a stop to it, and this leads into something else I really wanted to break down, because while this development definitely makes sense in context, it's also a rare example of Matt and Trey's portrayal of goths not being very true to life, at least not entirely. There's a lot at play here. A big recurring joke in this episode is that no one can seem to tell the difference between goths and emos, and much like what happened with the Vamp Kids back in the Ungroundable, the Goth Kids do not take kindly to being put in the same category as what they deem to be a lesser subculture.
Emo suck my goth balls.
But contrary to what some might have you believe, emo is more than just a cheap imitation of goth. Whether the Goth Kids like it or not, their lineage is undeniably a shared one. It's just that while goth was a product of the UK punk scene, emo was very much a product of the US punk scene. For anyone who's not aware, the term emo was coined as an abbreviation of emotional hardcore, an offshoot of hardcore punk, which was a style that originated in North America. The first emo bands formed during the mid-1980s in Washington, D.C., which was a major hardcore hotspot. The emo subculture as we know it today wouldn't emerge until the 90s or so, and wouldn't reach its most recognizable form until the 2000s, but it definitely traces its origins here.
I'm not emo, okay?
Then why are you listening to Sunny Day Real Estate?
Like I said, the Goth Kids teaming up with the Vamp Kids to fight the emos makes perfect sense in the specific story being told here. I just don't fully buy it in a vacuum. Based on everything I laid out in the previous section, even if the Goths see emos as posers, they would almost certainly see the Vamps as the bigger posers. Because Goth and emo aren't just aesthetically similar, they're blood relatives. Emo is just on a slightly different branch of the family tree, and another generation or two removed from their common ancestor.
Do not fight it, Mykal. Is being emo really all that different from being goth?
Of course, you don't always get along with your younger relatives, and when emo really started gaining traction, a lot of goths did indeed feel like their toes were being stepped on, especially since they were there first. But while the Goth Kids' anti-emo sentiment is somewhat true to life in that respect, it's far from the whole story. There have been some well-documented clashes between punk-adjacent subcultures in the past, but over time, that sort of thing became a lot less common. These days, goths and emos tend to be friendly enough with one another at best, and just kind of indifferent to each other at worst. I'm not saying it's been eliminated entirely. There's always going to be outliers, and these things can be very case by case. But in general, straight up animosity like we see in South Park seems to be increasingly rare.
They're evil!
As a side note, emo has developed its own issues with elitism and gatekeeping over the years as well. Frankly, in this day and age, you're far more likely to see members of these subcultures squabbling amongst themselves than beefing with each other. But even that's becoming kind of passé, partially because there also tends to be a lot of crossover among these cliques in modern times. This has always been the case to an extent, but it's a lot more normalized today. Again, it's a multifaceted situation with a lot more nuance than any 22-minute cartoon could really get into. Hell, if I tried to get into all of it, we'd be here all day. way, so I'm by no means faulting South Park for that. It just felt worthwhile to mention. The point is, while the Goth Kids' hardline purist mindset still exists, it's feeling more and more like a relic with each passing year. But the reason it ultimately works is because it is so in character. These kids are nothing if not stuck in their ways when it comes to splitting hairs.
Edgar Allan Poe was the original vamp kid. No, he was the original goth.
I should also point out that while the emo subculture reached the peak of its visibility in the 2000s, it had become kind of a punchline by that point. It was not uncommon at all to hear people using the word emo pejoratively, and considering the lengths they went to avoid being grouped in with the poser vamp kids in the Ungroundable, it definitely tracks that they'd take issue with being called emo too, given the stigma around the term. They even kind of foreshadowed this back in season 12.
Hey, emo kids! Cartman and Reggie are gonna fight after school!
Did she just call us emos?
Funny enough, the vamp kids could probably really relate to the emos in this respect. If you were on the internet at all in the late 2000s and early 2010s, you'll know that Twilight was also just a massive punching bag at the time.
You mean that one of us might not really be a vamp kid?
But another thing the show doesn't really get into is that while a lot of goths did take issue with being called emo in real life, it actually went both ways. A lot of emos felt the same way about being misidentified as goth. It all goes back to that feeling like your chosen identity isn't being properly respected or acknowledged. Over time though, I think most emos, goths, and everyone in between got wise to the fact that it wasn't really each other's fault. And to be fair to the goth kids a little bit, while they are broadly similar, there are some pretty clear differences in the way they present themselves compared to the vamps and emos, if you take more than a second to look at them. It's just that most people outside these circles can't really be bothered.
They aren't goth. They're douchey little vampire kids.
Looks the same to me.
Still, the characterization of the Goth Kids remains pretty on point here. Because they have such a stubborn, rigid way of looking at these things, it is unfathomable to them that anyone could ever confuse them for emos, even as an honest mistake. And that's how you end up with them saying things like this without even a shred of irony.
Emos suck. They're vile, self-pitying, depressed assholes!
Their elitist mindset becomes especially egregious when you factor in their age. Given that South Park's timeline is constantly sliding forward, the Goth Kids wouldn't have even really been there for the advent of the modern emo at this point, and wouldn't have been there for the earliest days of goth regardless.
What's Betamax?
Exactly.
What's VHS?
The births of these subcultures and any major conflicts between them would have been largely before their time, and there's some interesting social commentary here. They don't really know why they're quote-unquote supposed to hate emos, they just know that they are, and when asked to actually defend this stance, they stumble all over themselves. It's just pure dogma for them.
One is good and emos are horrible.
Once again, there are some objective distinctions between goth and emo. The Goth Kids do know this, but because they're not really used to being meaningfully challenged on their worldview, it's really hard for them to articulate those differences in a convincing way.
Goth's darkness is nihilistic, whereas emo's is cynical.
Wait, I thought we were cynical. Whatever, it doesn't matter.
On that note, if the Goth Kids still lack self-awareness, it's certainly not for a lack of this episode trying to beat it into them. There's a funny little scene early on where Mykal, Pete, and Firkle are just floored that Henrietta would ever want to hang out with the mopey emos who just sit on the bleachers during PE and talk about how much they hate everything. Later, in need of some backup for their assault on the emo camp, the Goth and Vamp Kids summon the ghost of Edgar Allan Poe to help them out. The joke here is that Poe turns out to be the ultimate elitist gatekeeper, turning his nose up at the emo, vamp, and Goth Kids alike. He also treats the Goth Kids the exact same way they treat everyone else, and it's hilarious how quickly they get fed up with what is basically their own behavior being spit back at them.
Where the hell is Edgar Allan Poe? He said he was over this and was gonna hang out at the Village Inn.
Finally, there's the eventual reveal that the so-called emo plants weren't actually doing anything at all. It was just an elaborate reality show prank on the groundskeeper. The goths and vamps who become emos did so of their own accord, after just a little bit of suggestion. It's such a hard left turn that Firkle turning out to be a double agent barely even registers. When Henrietta learns about this, she is mortified, but although the boys give her an out, and things kind of go back to business as usual afterwards, it does seem like something got through to her. Henrietta's next noteworthy appearance actually comes in South Park: The Fractured But Whole's From Dusk Till Casa Bonita DLC, in which she joins Mysterion and the new kid in their fight against the Vamp Kids. Come to think of it, it's interesting how the Fractured But Whole's two story add-ons each ended up being a showcase for one of the Biggle siblings. But while Henrietta still has no love for the Vamps, she does at least seem to have a new understanding of how someone might confuse her for one. She's still hostile about it, of course, but she more or less admits that the only immediately obvious difference to the untrained eye is that goths smoke cigarettes and Vamp Kids don't.
You know, if you were goth, you wouldn't even care about having friends.
Really? Well, what would I have to do to be goth?
It's easy.
However, Henrietta also says in that very same cutscene that goths don't care about having friends, and that, my friends, is the biggest lie of them all.
shit show.
At their worst, alternative subcultures can turn into those closed-minded social clubs the dead Kennedys sang about, effectively giving way to the same types of elitist attitudes and social structures they sought to rebel against in the first place. But at their best, they offer a safe haven, a place where those who feel shut out by their peers in mainstream society can find acceptance. Something that cannot and should not be overlooked is the genuine sense of community these scenes are capable of giving people. The Goth Kids are a great depiction of this. That short little scene of them dressed normally in the Ungroundable really kind of says it all, and I get why Henrietta feels the need to downplay this. As far as she's concerned, admitting it probably wouldn't be very goth of her, but for as much as the Goth Kids hate most things, they clearly like each other. More than that, they are ride or die for each other.
Does your mom know you took her car?
Do I care?
Sure, they occasionally get up to car theft, arson, or kidnapping their enemies, but it's rare that they're not all on the same page through it all.
We're gonna send him somewhere. It should be the most horrible, most miserable place on Earth.
Scottsdale.
And even if they never say it out loud, they just really seem to care for each other a lot. Like, the boys reporting Henrietta's parents to CPS for calling her emo is obviously ridiculous, but it does show just how willing they are to go to bat for her. They're also the only ones who show up at the bus stop to welcome her home when she gets back from the camp. Not even her parents could be bothered to do that. Another point against them, by the way. Plus, while Henrietta's realization that she turned emo all on her own could have been more of a teachable moment if she had been allowed to sit with it, it also says a lot that Pete and Mykal prioritized sparing her feelings.
What I meant to say was, we just infiltrated the emo lair and we torched the plant leader.
Oh. Oh!
Granted, their friend group isn't infallible. Firkle did try to betray everyone in Goth Kids 3 after all. But hey, he's young. He doesn't know any better. He probably doesn't even know his ABCs yet. Cut him a break. And speaking of betrayals, there's also season 23's Basic Cable, in which Pete kind of throws Mykal under the bus while trying to impress a new girl.
That's funny. Another one of the guys said that. He was the tall kid that kind of dresses like you?
Oh yeah, he's a total poser.
I joke about Firkle, but this really is just a total kid thing. And it actually is kind of like Firkle's betrayal in that it feels very isolated and situational, not necessarily indicative of a larger pattern of behavior. I mean, the other Goth Kids were apparently more than willing to forgive Firkle for joining the emos, since we see him hanging out with them again just 3 episodes after the fact. He probably just bought everyone a pack of cigarettes and they called it even. And as far as we know, nothing like that ever happened again.
Sorry.
I want to compare the Goth Kids to the main boys here for a second, because how many times has Cartman stabbed one or all of his friends in the back? I realize being a better friend than Eric Cartman is a really low bar, but the difference in dynamics is still pretty staggering. We have never once seen Mykal or Henrietta mock Pete for being poor like Cartman always does to Kenny. We've never once seen the Goth boys make fun of Henrietta's weight the same way the other guys do to Cartman. You could argue that some of their anger is unjustified, but you can't really accuse them of turning it on each other. Misery really does love company, I guess.
That was killer. We showed them. Yeah, I hope we win.
I think it's also a really smart detail that the Goth Kids are of varying ages. In elementary school, your friend group tends to be tied to your grade level. We see this reflected in the main gang's dynamic, and not just passively either. Just about any time they interact with another kid outside of the 4th grade, they feel the need to call that out.
Kenny has a girlfriend.
Yeah, a 5th grade girlfriend.
So the Goth Kids consisting of 1 kindergartner, 2 4th graders, and a 5th grader shows how they really had to go out of their way to find like-minded people. It's no wonder their bond is so strong. They chose each other. Their friendship wasn't just dictated by proximity, and we know that their bond endures well into adulthood, despite the fact that their difference in age means that school would have split them up at multiple points. In the post-COVID specials, the Goth Kids, or Goth adults I should say, are shown to still be friends in both timelines, which is a lot more than Stan, Kyle, and the guys can say. It would have been nice if they got a line or 2 in the specials, but it's cool to see their grown-up designs at all. In general, Matt and Trey seem to have a less is more approach when it comes to the Goth Kids, but while they still pop in from time to time, they haven't really been the focus of an episode since Goth Kids 3 first aired over a decade ago now.
So lame.
Yeah, I think we might be overdue for a Goth Kids 4. Until then, what do we know about the Goth Kids? Well, they're abrasive, stuck-up scene purists who badmouth almost everything and everyone around them, have committed more felonies than the average elementary schooler probably should, are frustratingly oblivious to their own hypocrisy most of the time, and worshipped an eldritch demon king at one point. They are also a tight-knit group of outcasts who found solace in one another, mostly always have each other's back, and have forged a bond that is not just likely, but confirmed to last a lifetime. And if that doesn't make you at least feel something, then, well, you might just be some kind of conformist poser.
All of you.
Folks, thanks so much for tuning into this South Park character video. This one was actually written by Noah Dominguez, who has previously written the excellent Daria videos you can find on this channel. Noah is actually also currently running a Kickstarter campaign for his own comic book called Feasters, which itself is a prequel to a punk rock horror comic he wrote called Basement Show. As I'm writing this, he's about 1/3 of the way to his goal, and honestly, if even just 1% of the people who watch this video threw him $1 or $2, he will make his goal so fast. Noah's a great writer. The link is in the description. Please consider donating. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.